Right, I will let people in from the waiting room, and I'll try to go live on LinkedIn as well to see what happens. Okay. All right. Just everyone. Turn off the meeting room. Waiting room.
Hey, everyone.
Hey, everyone.
Hey, everybody.
Welcome.
Thank you. Let me just turn my.
Hey, everyone.
Hey, everyone.
Hi.
Hi.
How's it going?
How's everyone doing?
Good, good. Thank you. It's been a busy day today, but good.
Yeah. Thankfully, the weather's getting better, at least within the Toronto side.
Oh, yeah.
The sun is setting late. It's rising a bit earlier.
That's definitely pleasant.
For sure.
We'll give it a couple of minutes for a few others to join.
Excellent.
Yeah. While you're logging in, feel free to introduce yourself in the chat. Feel free to turn your cameras on or whatever you prefer. And yeah, just hold tight a couple minutes and
Not a problem.
we'll be ready to start soon.
Thank you.
Yeah, if you have any issues throughout the event, feel free to share it on the chat and I will respond to it.
Thank you. Do we know how many people confirmed for the whole event? I know last week there were like about 80.
Yeah, so we should, I think it's at least 40 people registered on Zoom and then on LinkedIn around 100. And on LinkedIn, I've also started streaming to LinkedIn. This is the first time we're doing this. So
Oh, pretty cool.
I wonder if it'll work or not. We'll find out. But I will see if there's, yeah, I think we're on LinkedIn as well too.
Excellent.
Or at least on YouTube.
So many platforms nowadays. So
Yeah.
For sure. Awesome. Well, I think we can get started.
Sure.
Aadhilah, are you cool to, is the screen share okay?
Yes. Is everyone able to see my screen?
yes.
The slides? Okay, perfect.
Is there annotation on, Aadhilah? Is there a line or is that just on my side? We try to maybe stop screen share and screen share again, maybe.
Sure. Okay.
That's perfect.
We're good. Okay. Awesome. Should we get started?
Yeah, let's do it. All right. Welcome everyone to Inclusive Impact. Where today we'll be talking about building accessible web experiences at your organization. And we have a lovely panel as well who will be helping us and giving us lots of awesome insights. And I'll be introducing everyone throughout the event. So next slide, Aadhilah. So my name is Raj, and I'll be the introducer of this event, mostly just guiding things and moving things forward. But Aadhilah, my colleague, is a web developer at MeaningfulWork, will be leading the workshop and introducing our panel as well. Again, I'm Raj, co-founder and CEO of MeaningfulWork, and really excited to be here at this event. Aadhilah, want to give a quick introduction as well?
Yeah, so hey everyone, my name is Aadhilah and I'm a web developer helping build out the Meaningful Work platform. So as Raaj mentioned, I will be hosting the event alongside him. And yes, I'm very much looking forward to getting started.
Awesome. A bit of a story before we start. So actually, Aadhilah was really passionate about accessibility coming into her role at Meaningful Work, and she had done some work in the past. And she actually came up with this presentation originally a few months ago and just presented it internally to our web development team. It was super well received, and we decided to just take it public. And you know, the event today is a result of that. So big credits to Aadhilah for inspiring us to take this to a larger audience. So just a couple of housekeeping items before we get started. Just please leave your mics on mute unless you're speaking, and you will get a chance to speak during to ask questions during the expert panel. Thanks for confirming the LinkedIn stream. Yay, it's the first time. So feel free to turn your cameras on and type any questions you have into the chat box. There's also audio captions available in Zoom. So if you click the CC button and then enable, or I think it's show or hide subtitles, then you should be able to see the closed captioning as well. And yeah, feel free to also take a moment to introduce yourself. Feel free to share a bit about yourself and your organization if you're representing your organization today. Would love to get to know you. And yeah, we have quite a few people today, definitely more than we expected. So very excited. All right, next slide. So yeah, I'd just like to acknowledge the land that Meaningful Work is located on, and that's unceded Tsleil-Waututh, Lumi, Wasanic, Katsi, Stolo Treaty Association, and Semiahmoo Territory. That is the land that I'm usually on, and the company office is located on. So if you feel free to just take a moment and think about what reconciliation means to you. And if you are not aware of what land that you're on, there is a great resource, native-land.ca, where you can find that out. So just to introduce the agenda for today. So I'll start off with a bit of an introduction about Meaningful Work, what we do. Then we'll move on to an introduction to web accessibility, which is the workshop part of our event today. And then we'll be going through our panel discussion and finally our Q&A. Awesome. So just a quick introduction to Meaningful Work and what we're about. So Meaningful Work, we're building a community of people who are striving to make impact in this world. It's not just a community of people, but also organizations. And how we're unique is really connecting the nonprofit, for-profit, and individuals together to create a better impact and eventually create a better world through collaboration. So what we've built out is a platform that you can engage with. So check out our new website at meaningful.ca to learn more. If you are a nonprofit, you can use this platform as a resource to post opportunities and recruit skilled volunteers to join your cause. There's many types of opportunities like strategic advising or projects or events that you can post and share and get access to our community of volunteers. And if you're an individual who wants to give back, or you belong to a company who maybe your team wants to get together and do something related to volunteering, this is also the place where you can sign up, create an account, and connect with nonprofits across the North America and also in your local community to make an impact. So we are growing. You definitely take this opportunity to join our network of over 200 nonprofits and 300 volunteers across North America. So that's a bit about Meaningful Work, about what we do. And it's been such a great journey. You know, we started just when the pandemic hit, and we had the opportunity to support many organizations through some difficult times and transitions to a really digital hybrid age. So lots of learnings. The other thing I want to mention is if you check out the website, there's also a Discord community. And that's where you can have a bit more of the informal connections across the community with other organizations, other individuals, and we're continuing to grow that. So I would love for you to stay connected through after the event, and we can continue the conversation there. So yeah, I'll make sure to post some of those links into the chat as well. Awesome. So now on to the main chunk of the event, which is our workshop on web accessibility. And I will pass it on to Aadhilah to take it from here.
Awesome. Thank you, Raj. So hello, everyone, once again. Thanks so much for joining us today. We're really excited to kick off our first event of the year at Meaningful Work, and it's on web accessibility. So yeah, let's begin. For those of us joining in the audience today, you might come from various different backgrounds. Maybe it's technical, maybe it could be design, product, administrative, management, a combination of any of these or even more. I myself, I'm interested in the technical side of understanding web accessibility, but regardless of what your background and your skill set is, this is a topic that is relevant to everyone. And I will be speaking more broadly on the issue today. So we do have an audience poll to gauge a sense of who is joining us here today. And when we get the results in, we definitely want to share it with you all. So Raj, are you able to share that poll?
Yeah, I just launched it.
Okay, great. Yeah, if you get a chance, just get that filled out. And so while that's taking place, let's just start off with asking the question of why, right? Why are we talking about web accessibility? For one, there has been an exponential growth of remote first digital communication within the past couple of years, especially since the pandemic, and it's increased our need for digital interactions. Like Raj briefly mentioned, throughout the process, there have been a lot of nonprofit organizations and small businesses who've experienced a range of challenges keeping up with providing an equitable and accessible landscape to their end users. And it's a simple fact that building inclusive web experiences increases access and stronger relationships with your audience. It's simply good for business too. It overlaps with practices like usability, so UX, UI, search engine optimization, mobile designs for phones, among many other benefits. And it's also important because it could be the law in some places, like in Canada and the US, it has been incorporated into law, and certain organizations are required to comply with certain guidelines, or else they risk penalties of legal action or non-compliance. And just generally, there's a limited awareness on the topic. And so that's why I wanted to shed light on it today. So starting off with what web accessibility is, it is the process of creating websites that's accessible to everyone, regardless of ability. It's the recognition that people interact with technology in different ways, and it provides solutions which allow people who do have barriers to engage with the content and the resources in the same way as others. So, whoops. Sorry about that. Oh, okay.
Quickly. Yeah, so just to go through the results. So we have many of you from the nonprofit sector today, and many in technology, as well as a good representation from small SMBs and enterprise. And it looks like a few of you come from very established organizations with digital accessibility, very established in digital accessibility, and about half and half from just getting started and getting to a point where you're really proud of it. So yeah, just to get that's a sense of who's here today, and hopefully that by the end of the event, you'll have some more, we'll get some ideas of some of those aspects of where to improve on your digital accessibility side. So back to you, Aadhilah.
Awesome, thank you. I'll just move this out of the way then. All right, so yes, some statistics for strengthening the case for improving your website's accessibility would be, first being 98% of the world's top 1 million websites do not offer full accessibility. So if you look at it the other way, 2% of these websites are recognizing that there's a largely underserved and growing market full of people with disabilities. In the year 2020, there were 2,500 federal lawsuits filed in the US due to organizations not complying with web accessibility standards. And this has increased by 12% after the pandemic. Year after year, this number is growing significantly compared to before. And also a noteworthy study conducted in the UK back in 2016 found that 71% of people with disabilities would abandon a site that is difficult to use. So in the study, there were 363 participants. So I would say 71% of that is a pretty big chunk. And so in terms of legislation that exists within Canada, the government of Canada and many provinces are currently working towards making the country more inclusive and barrier-free. In this slide, I've listed the names of all the legislation that are passed in the yellow box and proposed in the gray box that exist across the provinces. And so I'll point out a few of them. There's the Accessible Canada Act, which requires organizations falling under federal jurisdiction to comply with WCAG guidelines, which I'll mention in a bit, or else they face fines up to $250,000. There's also the Ontario Act, which mandates private, public, and nonprofit organizations with over 50 employees must also have their websites comply with these guidelines, or else they face fines. And the penalties are similar in Nova Scotia. British Columbia, on the other hand, they are implementing laws that they hope they will have in place by the end of the year. So you've heard me mention these guidelines that must be followed, but what exactly are they and who sets them? So in this space, you'll often hear the acronym WCAG, which stands for Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. And essentially what it is it's an international standard developed by an international group or consortium called W3C. They come together and they create rules and standards for the internet. And most of the laws that you hear of, they require that the standards be met according to what WCAG sets. So what are examples of disabilities and different abilities? To list a few, they could be visual. So that's the partial or permanent loss of vision and the inability to see. So people with blindness, color blindness, low-level vision requiring glasses. They could be auditory, so deafness or hard of hearing. The hearing issues can range from mild to severe. They can be related to speech with conditions like stuttering or muteness, and they can also be mild to severe. People may experience physical mobility issues with conditions like amputation, paralysis, arthritis, or they could be cognitive and neurological, which include autism, ADHD, learning disabilities, mental health issues, to list some examples. So in this portion, I wanted to highlight some of the common barriers that prevent people from accessing resources on a website. And some of these examples, they might delve into more technical issues. So if you are technical, I will say it won't be too technical. And if you are not familiar with code or HTML or any of that kind of stuff, that's okay, totally okay too, because it won't get too complicated. So one example of a barrier that people might experience on a website is not providing alternative text description for images. So what that means basically is an alternative text description is something that you embed in the code that you write, which allows assistive technologies like screen readers to read a description for this image out loud so that the person who is on the image, they have context on what's happening and what they're supposed to be looking at. It's common for many images on a website to not have a description at all, or the description could be very vague. So you see here on the slide, there's a picture of Central Park in New York, and it would be best described as aerial view of Central Park in New York, rather than something really vague or generic, like park surrounded by city. Another similar issue to the first is that websites don't provide this thing called ARIA attributes. And essentially they are like text descriptions for images we mentioned, but here it allows assistive technologies to easily describe the elements on the page. So for instance, here you have like a button that's representing like a menu icon. And so you would have like a description here that indicates, oh, okay, this is a menu. Also falling under the same category of providing descriptive web pages are using semantic HTML, which basically means that there are certain pieces of code that in and of itself are descriptive enough, and it provides the person who's using assistive technologies with enough context on what they're viewing. So one example would be there are elements that are called divs, and essentially what it represents is like a container or a box. And given how flexible HTML is, sometimes you can use divs for almost anything, right? And so if there's an example of like a button here that you see, like a blue button, its functionality is a button, but a person codes it in the form of like a div. The person who is using an assistive, like a screen reader, for instance, will be left guessing what exactly this div is supposed to do, because it doesn't really provide too much detail on what they're looking at. And so it's better to use HTML elements that are, sort of proportionate to like what they're supposed to do. Another common barrier are that websites don't provide descriptive URLs. So something like a button, like you see here in these two examples, it's important to avoid descriptions like read more or click here, because it doesn't give enough context on what the link is supposed to be about. And even worse, when there are no ARIA labels to support it, it's sort of like you're leaving the person in the dark. So like you have a bad example where the button says see more, and then a good example would be browse collections, because it's a bit more contextual. And a next common barrier is not creating website that is keyboard accessible. So many people, regardless of their disability, also use keyboards for convenience and shortcuts. And so when you write your code, there are ways to ensure that keys that you press, such as the tab, the space bar, arrows, the shift key, it lands on specific elements on the page. In this way, it makes it convenient for people to not have to rely on a mouse or a trackpad, and being able to focus on elements on this page also help screen readers describe the element out loud too. So video captions and transcripts for recorded visuals are also helpful, especially for people with auditory barriers, learning disabilities, even people who are learning the language as a second language like English. And color contrast is an important issue as well. So this is something we come across, I would say, more often than, or maybe it's always been an issue, but with modern, sleek, minimalist designs that we're exposed to across websites and digital media today, it can be harder for a person with visual barriers to perceive colors easily. Something as simple as like washed out gray text on a white background looks amazing, but it could also be indecipherable to some. And lastly, design and layout is crucial when you're building out a website. Oftentimes, it's easy to place a lot of information in cluttered ways. It might seem intuitive to your business logic or the people on your team. It could be using certain color combinations and maybe placing elements in ways that might seem logical, but really are causing a lot of difficulty to navigate, and many more examples of layouts that might not be as straightforward. This leads to information overload, and it makes it hard for the user to engage with your service or your product. So you have seen some examples on some common barriers that's experienced. And, again, for those who are in the audience, you might directly be like a designer or a developer, and it's like your responsibility. Or is it management's decision to make these decisions based on what the organization's priorities are? Maybe you are yourself someone who's thinking about these decisions and you don't know, where to start or how to approach it. There are other millions of things to consider as well. So I think I'll take this moment to segue into our panel portion. So I'll turn over to the panelists who will help us in seeking answers to these questions. So I'll just briefly introduce our panelists here today, starting off with Zeeshan Mahmood. He's currently working as a QA specialist at BMO Bank. Zeeshan graduated from Seneca College in computer networking, and his previous experiences have always been in the accessibility field. He's worked with companies to explore new ways of using devices that help visually impaired people in their day-to-day life. So Zeeshan himself is blind and uses several assistive devices to perform daily tasks. I also want to introduce Varun Chandak, who is the founder of the Toronto-based nonprofit called Access to Success. and which supports the development of future leaders with disabilities and assistive technologies. He's led the Access to Success Fellowship, which provides up to $90,000 in scholarship to MBA students with disabilities. He's also launched ATS Labs, which is Canada's first startup accelerator serving people with disabilities. And lastly, we have Juan Olarte, CEO and co-founder of Digita11y. This is a company that's identifying and finding efficient ways to solve accessibility gaps. And Juan himself is a digital accessibility specialist with more than 20 years of experience. Being visually impaired himself, he's experienced firsthand the challenges faced by people with disabilities, especially when it comes to the web. And he's working hard at sharing his knowledge to make it accessible to everyone. So I'll start off with you, Juan. We know web accessibility is important, right? It's a simple fact that it's beneficial. It's great for our end users, our organization as a whole. But we hesitate. We want to get started on it, but we never get to that point. So my question is, why do organizations and businesses struggle with prioritizing web accessibility?
Aadhilah, thank you so much. First of all, I just want to thank you for inviting me. One of the ways, and I've seen organizations struggling in not being able to start web accessibility, is the lack of knowledge in terms of what they should be doing first and how to prioritize it. They don't have to spend a lot of money, but what they need to understand is what are the different type of standards that we need to follow. Who is going to be helping us understand what accessibility means for each one of the roles and how we can put together a plan. I think many times organizations don't have a correct plan on how to implement or how to address accessibility or integrate it early on within the development lifecycle.
And to you, Varun, we see more and more multi-million and billion-dollar corporations taking advantage of this underserved market, rewriting their branding and their narrative by incorporating inclusivity and diversity. They're doing something that many companies and organizations aspire to follow. And so for those of us, who don't know what we could be missing out on, tell us, how do we as companies and organizations limit our market expansion, our customer growth, when we don't include when we don't adopt inclusive practices on our website or our digital product?
Absolutely. Thank you, Aadhilah. It's a pleasure to be here. Well, I would say you mentioned 2,500 federal lawsuits in the US in 1 year alone. So I'm sure that alone would get people interested in accessibility. But that's not the right answer. That's not sufficient. It's not ideal to be just doing this because we're scared of getting sued. As you mentioned, the true benefit, what people might lose out on, what companies, organizations might lose out on, is a tremendous market. Accessibility is not just web accessibility, but overall accessibility. And people with disabilities, in total, research has shown that around the world, people with disabilities command disposable income of $1 trillion. That's a market the size of China. And that's an entire market that companies and organizations would be leaving on the table by not serving. You also, for example, you said 71% of the people with disabilities leave a website that is not accessible. That's an entire market that companies might not be serving. The second piece is innovation. People with disabilities, we are the original life hackers. I say we because I have a couple of disabilities myself. I'm hard of hearing and I have partial paralysis in my left arm. And by not including these original life hackers, companies are losing out on innovations that come because of the unique perspective of people with disabilities. For instance, things like electric toothbrushes, captioning, Velcro straps, they were all created as accessibility products first. The third out of the four things that I was going to mention, the third thing is talent. For example, if your job descriptions are not accessible, then you're losing out on a tremendous amount of talent that would be otherwise interested in working with you. Even a simple statement, for instance, that we are inclusive of people with disabilities and your lived experience as a person with a disability is an actual strength. When we included that statement in our job postings, we actually had people talking about that in the cover letter saying, the reason I'm applying for this job is because of that statement. And they turned out to be some absolutely brilliant people. And the last piece that I wanted to mention, which if there are, I think I saw a bunch of not-for-profit responses in here. A lot of the audience members are from not-for-profits. So the last piece is the prospect of losing potential funding opportunities. If 71% of your donors are leaving your website if it's not accessible, there's other research that has shown that organizations, 70% of the organizations prioritize buying products and services that prioritize accessibility. How long would it be before foundations and funders and donors start thinking and looking for organizations prioritizing accessibility? So if you don't get that in place now, that's a lot of funding that organizations might be leaving on the table by not being accessible.
Thank you, Varun. I actually had a couple of follow-up questions. One, you mentioned original life hackers. What is that? Can you expand on that?
Of course. So it's a concept of mismatched interactions. It's a concept of moving away from the medical model of disability to the medical model of accessibility to the social model of accessibility. It means that the world is not designed for people with disabilities in mind. Until live captioning became a thing, I was not really able to do any phone calls. I've never been able to do phone calls all my life because I'm hard of hearing and I rely on live captioning. So when I growing up, it was less of a problem, relatively speaking, because the only people I wouldn't speak with on the phone would be friends and relatives, and that's okay. But once I grew up sufficiently, and I had to do job interviews, and those job interviews had to take place over the phone, that wasn't designed for me. So what I would do was I would make my dad sit next to me when I had a job interview, and I'd put the put the call on speakerphone. And I'd tell my dad to write down the question as fast as he could so that I could read the question and then respond. In fact, in one interview, my dad tried to write the answer to the question, and that just confused me even more. So I had to tell him, no, just write the question and I'll give the answer. This is just one example of us hacking our life. That there's many, many, many other examples. Even now, I lip read, which means in a world of masks, I can't really communicate with people. I can't tell when people are smiling. So I ended up paying more attention to people's eyes. If I feel like they cracked a joke, are they being sarcastic or are they actually making a joke? I look at their eyes, and that's how I've sort of picked up more on body language. That's just a few personal examples of what I meant by people with disabilities being the original life hackers, and that's where our unique perspective comes from.
Mm-hmm. And when you mention job descriptions not being inclusive enough, what are like examples of that? And if so, how do you make it inclusive?
Absolutely. So for everybody here on the call, think back to when you were applying for jobs. An average job description has what, I don't know, 1,000 words at the very least. How many of you actually read all of those 1,000 words time after time after time applying for jobs on LinkedIn? Nobody really does that. And if you are part of the neurodiverse community, or if you have certain mental health challenges, parsing through that wall of text becomes even more difficult. And that's an entire population of talent that people might be leaving on the table right now. So what we did was we came up with audio described job descriptions. We basically created a very simple presentation, put it on YouTube, and we described what was on the slides. And people who can go in, sort of watch or listen to the job description. That's one example. Another example is about asking for accessibility. Like when we ask talent if there's anything we can do to make the hiring process more accessible, because what we were trying to do was not just make the process accessible, but we were trying to create a delightful process. Hiring, interviewing when you're a candidate is very stressful. It doesn't matter if you have a disability or not, it's stressful for everybody. We were trying to flip that on its head and create that process to be a delightful process. So we gave multiple options, for instance, to people to let us know if they have any accessibility needs. We have that in the job description. We have that when we sent out interview invitations by email. And most importantly, we mentioned it at the beginning of the interview itself. It genuinely surprised us how many people brought something up at that last moment. And it wasn't necessarily accessibility requests. It was things like when we would say, before we begin this conversation, is there anything I can do to make this conversation more accessible? People said things like, oh, I'm glad you brought that up. My internet is giving me a lot of trouble today, so I might lose out on audio or video. I'm sorry about that. Please let me know if that happens. That's because they're nervous about losing out on an interview because of an internet problem. So that was the opportunity for them to bring it up, and we were like, of course, not an issue. That's a few examples of how you can make your hiring process more accessible. And I wrote about it a while ago, and I'm just about to send the link to that blog post in the chat.
Amazing. Thank you, Varun. I'll switch it over to Zeeshan. Zeeshan, you're in the audience. I'll just give him a second. Hey, Zeeshan, are you? Not sure if he was able to get on. Okay.
I think you're just muted, Zeeshan.
Okay. Zeeshan, once you're ready, just say hi, and then we'll come back to you. Juan, I wanted to ask you, are there instances where advancement, and I say that in quotes, in technology is creating more barriers for yourself or others in the population?
Definitely. And I like the fact that you use the quotation. For the last few years, there has been a movement in some organizations creating overlays. And let me just quickly explain what an overlay is. An overlay is a piece of technology that is injected into a website through a JavaScript scenario where it tries to replicate aspects of assistive technologies or claims to make a website more accessible. This is actually creating a huge impact in terms of people with disabilities. In fact, I've been in many websites that have an overlay, and it interferes with my own assistive technology, and it makes it more difficult. I have talked to many friends that have disabilities, are perhaps blind, and as soon as they find out that a website has an overlay, they completely leave the experience. The reason why is because these overlays, they claim to fix accessibility, pretty much utilizing a silver bullet where every single accessibility issue on your website is going to be fixed with our overlay without you having to do anything. And a lot of companies don't understand that this is not actually the way to make things accessible. In fact, in the US, they're opening themselves to litigation because many of them are being sued as a result of users not being able to properly interact with their specific websites. That's just an example of how technology is supposed to be making lives easier for people with disabilities, really providing equal access to information, but in reality is making it worse.
I see. So when you say these overlays are claiming that they make the web more accessible, I'm wondering if it doesn't in reality, why is it still a thing? Why do people implement it onto their websites, like using JavaScript, for instance?
That's a very good question. And a lot of times I will say is people don't know better in terms of what education means for accessibility. So if you see an overlay, or if somebody's presenting you with an overlay that has nice bells and whistles, perhaps the overlay is going to change the color contrast of the site, or is going to speak the words of your website out loud. Somebody who doesn't know about accessibility is going to say, oh, this is great. I don't have to do anything else to help people with disabilities access information within my website. But what they don't realize is that at the core of their website, Aadhilah, you were mentioning how buttons should be buttons rather than divs, right? Overlays, I won't be able to change those things. However, they're giving a false sense of security to people. And people with disabilities, when they go into their website, they're going to be confronted with the little percentage of assistive technologies and overlays have, and are going to interact in the wrong way with their own assistive technologies, to the point where they're not going to be able to access the information within the website.
So then I guess what I would wonder is, if this is what is being sold as helpful, but in fact it's not, how does an organization vet out the technologies they plan to use that is credible and useful and valuable to the end user then?
This is the $1 million question. So you can actually go back early on, even to my first question, in terms of how can organizations ensure their product are accessible. Now, if you're not a big organization, you're not going to have a lot of money to spend in accessibility. But I think accessibility sometimes gets miscategorized in terms of being really expensive, or is going to cut the our designer's point of view, or we won't be able to implement it. But if you integrate accessibility early on within the development life cycle, you're going to do a lot better. Just to give you a few examples, if before you start doing a web accessibility development, you understand what framework you're going to be utilizing. Maybe that framework, a lot of the times, already have accessibility built into there. So you can perhaps work with your product owner and your project manager to integrate or create user stories that are going to help people with disabilities. That's going to be a portion that you're going to be doing. Now, the other thing that you want to include is a lot of times people tend to forget about digital formats like Word documents or PDFs. In fact, a lot of companies have PDF within their websites where people are going to be able to access that material, and oftentimes it's not accessible. PDFs are some of the cheapest and easiest way for them to provide more of an accessible experience to their users.
Okay, thank you for that.
No problem.
I think Zeeshan is experiencing some technical issues. So I will redirect the question towards either of you, Varun or Juan. From what you've noticed year after year, being longtime users of assistive tech devices, or generally being more familiar with what's happening in the market, and in cases relying on them to enhance your quality of life and your day-to-day experiences, are you at a point where you're noticing things that you're able to do now, but 10 years ago you couldn't because of technology limitations? This is more like on the contrary of what I asked Juan earlier.
Actually, let me just quickly jump into that. I'm originally from Colombia, so growing up, I didn't get that much support in terms of assistive technology. So because I'm not fully blind, I'm visually impaired, I was never really sent to an organization like the CNIB. So I never really got to experience what assistive technology was. Growing up, I didn't like technology. I didn't like computers because, as you can imagine, trying to read information in a screen, it was impossible to me. I wasn't able to do it. When I got to Canada, I got to experience what Zoom text was, or script magnification. And then the progress that they have had over the last 20 years is amazing. Even screen readers, or utilizing Siri, I can actually dictate, it can read back to me. And it's one of those things that Varun was saying, where assistive technology has actually taken over many activities that people without disability are experiencing. And for me, it just makes such a difference. I wouldn't be able to do what I'm doing right now if it wasn't because of assistive technologies.
Same here. This is Varun speaking. And as I was mentioning earlier, without live captioning, I genuinely don't know what I would have done over the pandemic with the masks. So it's been such a huge life changer. The transition from phone-based conference calls to everybody using Zoom or Microsoft Teams, where there's live captioning, again, an absolute game changer in my professional, from my professional career. So there's definitely a lot of really good progress that's been amazing, for sure.
If I may, just one more thing, and this loops a little bit back into that life hack. Years ago, before cell phones, had the nice cameras, I will have to carry with me a magnifier. So whenever I will go to a restaurant, I will pull it out and try to read the menu in there. But right now with a phone, just as simple as getting there, taking a picture, enlarging the picture, and then I have no problem actually asking for the food that I want to without having to ask somebody to read it for me.
Right.
You must have great records of everywhere you went to.
So in the cases where these technologies have helped immensely, I imagine those who are making these decisions, whether it be business decision, technical, product, at the very top level of a company, they truly do believe that the technology will propel society towards a more simplified, streamlined, higher quality of experience. But in the cases where it does exclude certain populations or further isolates them, in the previous questions we asked, and it's unintentional, I wanted to ask Varun, what happens when people with disabilities are not representing leadership voices during the decision-making process?
Yeah, so quick sidebar, the reason we launched the fellowship program for MBA students with disabilities. Growing up, I had very average ambitions. I was a very average kid with very average ambitions. All I wanted was a regular corporate career. So when I first got internet, I used to Google for regular corporate leaders who have a disability. And the only people who would pop up would be Richard Branson and Paralympics and artists, and not really anybody in corporate. I mean, Richard Branson, he's hardly regular. I had nothing in common with Richard Branson. So I realized that importance of representation at the leadership level, it's important to have that, which is why we ended up launching the Access to Success Fellowship for MBA students with disabilities, so that we could build a pipeline of future leaders with disabilities who are aware of the importance of disability inclusion. And what is that importance? It's, as I was saying earlier, it's the importance of having that unique perspective, which is the case with every aspect of diversity. When you don't have representation in the leadership, whether it's the top level leadership or management, middle management leadership, employees are more hesitant to speak up about their own experiences, about their own need for accessibility devices or accessibility supports. And when you don't have that, when those employees don't have what they need to be productive, their productivity is lower, the employee turnover is higher. The last thing is that what I wanted to highlight here was just the benefit of inclusive design and accessibility. When you have accessible and inclusively designed practices, both at the leadership level and at the employee level, it ends up benefiting everyone. Remote work, for instance, has been a long-standing request, an accessibility request from the disability community. And when the pandemic hit, suddenly it was just normalized. And guess what? Everybody loves remote work. That's just one example. The same thing with flexibility of hours, what I talked about in terms of job descriptions, in terms of captioning. Think about captioning. Think about the time you were on a 15 people call, and as it happens, you zoned out. And if you have captioning, you can just take a look at the transcript or the captioning and sort of get back into what's going on. I partly kid, but the truth is that experience helps everybody in the company.
Right. Thank you. Looking at the general makeup of organizations that actually struggle with this area of adopting web accessibility, one of the most common factors is their size and their resource constraints. So Juan, I wanted to ask you, how can a small nonprofit organization or a company compete in the same way as a larger, well-funded organization, given their limited budgeting and resources?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I think a lot of it comes with education. And while it's difficult for somebody within a small organization to know everything about accessibility, the community out there is always welcoming, and they love to provide feedback or more information in terms of what they should do. So for sure, I will encourage them to join meetups. and join groups in LinkedIn about accessibility, ask questions. That's going to be the first step into their accessibility journey. Try to connect with other organizations that are going to help them in terms of understand what are some of their accessibility needs. If they're going to be procuring a new website or perhaps a specific type of technology, always include, is your application accessible? And if so, can you please provide some information as to how? That itself is going to help them. Now, that type of negotiation early on, before they buy any type of application, is going to be much faster, and they're going to get back to them a lot better than after they paid. After they paid, they're going to be, oh yeah, we're working on this, perhaps our next release. But if they're actually looking for an accessible solution, try to incorporate that specific language in there. And as I said, really do an outreach for the community, join meetups and different boards to try to find more information about accessibility and what they can do. And more important, and one more thing, is really do an outreach to people with disabilities and ask for feedback. What will they help? How can they actually help them if they were to go to a website? They're going to be able to get some more information like that as well.
Mm-hmm. Varun, I'll ask you one question before I direct it to Zeeshan, who is back online. So when these organizations have reached the point where they can adopt some of these inclusive practices on their website or their product, what are ways that they can measure this impact once it's implemented?
Absolutely. And just to, on the previous question as well, there is support available regardless of the size of the organization. We do a lot of free work with smaller startups, smaller not-for-profits on the broader inclusive design application and broader accessible practices. So if that's kind of what you're looking for, please do reach out. To your question about measuring the impact when it comes to accessibility, especially web accessibility, if you begin from the point where I don't have to convince you anymore that accessibility is important, and you start implementing accessibility, then you can measure the impact of that accessibility over time and the amount of time it takes you to keep your assets, your website, your marketing, your online presence accessible. Over time, you'll notice a decrease in the amount of time you have to spend, because as you go through training, as you become more familiar with what's necessary, the time investment becomes lower and lower. Similarly, the cost in the beginning, especially if this is something that's completely new, I would imagine you are going to need external help from organizations like Digitally Accessible, from people like Juan, from maybe even us in terms of other accessibility, other practices. In the beginning, it will be expensive. But again, as you go through the process, that becomes a sort of an investment that pays off almost in perpetuity. Almost, not quite, nothing is free, but almost. Similarly, in terms of people, you'll attract better talent. And if you're truly interested in building accessible practices, accessible processes, your retention and your employee engagement will be much, much better. All of which results in better retention, better productivity, better employee satisfaction, which ultimately gets measured through your surveys, if you have those kind of surveys. And the last piece is user research. As you start implementing accessible practices, I would imagine you have some sort of user research, hopefully at the beginning. If you don't, you should. And when you do that user research over time, I can guarantee there will be an increase in satisfaction, not just from the disability community, but from your broader user set as well, whether they are donors, whether they are funders, whether they are beneficiaries of your services, or whether they are just general users or employees. Because again, research has proven, there is research out there which says that accessibility and disability inclusion matters to all of these different subsets. I do want to hear from Zeeshan, so I'm just going to pause here and go back to Aadhilah.
Zeeshan, are you able to join us?
Yes, good afternoon, everyone.
Hi, Zeeshan, how are you?
I'm good, thank you. How are you doing?
Good, good. It's nice to hear from you. We are reaching the end of the panel, so I wanted to ask you, along with the other panelists, the final question. Who is ultimately responsible, in your opinion, in an organization to make decisions on prioritizing accessibility? Are they the programmers, the designers, management, executives? And how does each individual fit into this discussion? Go ahead, Zeeshan.
Yeah, okay. So I believe business is the one who is responsible for the accessibility, as for the accessibility requirements and implementation into the application. So that's because the business is paying for the application. They are the one who provide all the requirements. That's how the application is going to be like, and that's what we need. And so developers, quality assurance engineers, and all the technology team works according to the business requirements. That's what exactly they're looking for. As we see that this most of the time that don't happen, business don't provide too much priority to the accessibility. They just mention whatever their needs are, so they don't care about accessibility so much. In the banking industry, that like I noticed that the technology team, they just took care of it. For example, it all depends on the executive to the manager. If let's say a business is not raising that concern, if anyone in the team raised that concern, right? For example, myself in my team, whatever all the applications that I have, we are updating few applications. So whatever application we update, I see the requirements, and none of those applications actually, the business don't even mention that this application must be AODA compliant or WCAG compliant. So I have to raise a concern to the developer. You know what? We are updating this application after 20 years, so we want to make sure that it's accessible to all the users, because we have to make it accessible in future anyway, because of the government guidelines are getting more strict and strict, in future. And so let's do it now. So if one person in the team raise his hand, then other team automatically cooperate, and people said, okay, yeah, let's do that. And so I will say the business in first place will be responsible for raising this.
Thank you. I'll extend the question to the other speakers if they want to contribute. 30 seconds. We wanted to open up the floor to Q&A right after. So Juan, Varun.
Sure, I can go very quickly, and I agree. The business, obviously, they have the money, but I will also say that it's a combined effort. Oftentimes, developers, designers, testers, or even the business, they may want to have accessibility, but they may not know how, right? So having an accessibility expert that will help them or guide them through is going to be the first step. Again, education, but I believe it's going to be a combined effort as well.
In an ideal world, C-level executives themselves, but we don't live in an ideal world. But if the senior leadership is aligned on the need for accessibility and disability inclusion, if their incentives are aligned with accessibility and disability inclusion, the rest of the group usually falls into place.
Amazing, thank you. Thank you, panelists, for your insight to these questions. I'm going to open up the floor to audience members. If you have any follow-up questions or something you'd like to ask, feel free to unmute your mic. You can also submit it into the chat, and Raaj will read it out loud. So yes, you're all welcome to ask. It's okay, don't be shy.
We don't mind.
No.
Yeah, it looks like oh, Victoria, would you like to say something?
Yeah, hi. Thank you for being on this panel. And I guess my question is, how have you been able to kind of maintain and rally support for maybe your mental health or some just like emotional exhaustion for barriers to access to being able to put these things forward? Like, are you a part of groups, or maybe there's colleagues that support you in this? But I know being on an accessibility network for my previous company, it was tiring. It was definitely tiring, and they don't always compensate you for the work that you put in. So I'm just wondering what you have done to be able to continue doing this work.
For me personally, it's a passion. So because I have a disability, I understand what inaccessible content means for people with disabilities. So even while creating this organization, it was how can we actually help the end user? So at one point, well, I understand sometimes it's very difficult because people or the higher ups, they may not want to listen to you. It's always going to, for me, it has always been that like mission in terms of how can we actually help people with disabilities, just because I understand that. And again, education is a big portion of it. And sometimes people want to help, but it also depends on the organization.
Yeah, thanks so much. I think there's a lot of really good questions, but I know we are reaching the end of the session. So perhaps what I'll do is I'll note down some of the questions. If you have any further questions for the panelists, feel free to reply to our email, and we'll make sure to do our best to answer those. Yeah, no, Aadhilah, do you have any kind of closing thoughts?
I'm really sorry about that. I would love to continue hearing your questions, but please do email us and we will answer them. And then when you all receive the email, you can also get the updates on the answers. But yes, so I wanted to wrap up today's event. I wanted to extend my gratitude and my appreciation for the panelists for sharing their valuable experiences and insights with us today. Most of all, thank you so much, the audience members, for attending and for being curious about this topic. I hope you can take away everything you've learned and start building out your organization more inclusively if you haven't gotten started. If you are a nonprofit who is in need of skilled volunteers like developers, graphic designers, and more to help you revise your website, see how accessible it is already or how it could be, MeaningfulWork, we can help you recruit volunteers through our platform by posting opportunities and helping you manage that entire process from start to end. And if you're just an individual or you belong to a company and you want to give back with your skills, use the platform to connect with nonprofits because they are always, always, always in need of help. And we also want to continue connecting with you on topics that matter most. So tell us how we can make our future events better, what you did like, what you didn't like. I think Zoom surveys will, I think, Raj, you're going to be sending out a Zoom survey.
It'll be out over email. So we will send out the recording, some of the resources that we have planned, as well as the ability to connect with the speakers as well. So stay tuned for the post-event email, and would love to hear your thoughts and continue the conversation.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much, everyone. Again, hope to connect again.
Thank you so much.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, guys.
Bye.
Bye.